Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Divisional Round Highlight Haven NFL Tailgate Show. I'm your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by my good friend Chase Coburn from Chase's Sports News to preview each and every game during the Divisional Round of the NFL playoffs. Chase, it's great to have you on.
Appreciate it, Matthew. Really glad to be a guest on your show. I know I've had you on multiple times over on my side, so glad to be a guest on here, and I'm excited to talk some NFL because 4.5 hours away from a divisional round playoff game just warms my heart.
Yeah, and obviously we will be accepting callers in the stream per usual. We will also be monitoring the
Love to
chat
see
if
you
you
guys.
have
Yeah.
any questions. Now, moving over, let's get to the first game. Texans at Chiefs. This one's Saturday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. Chiefs are 8.5-point favorites. You're my guest. I'll let you get it started on this one.
All right. Well, for me, I think that the key difference in this game, when you look at the Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Texans, it's simply going to be, can the Texans replicate what they did last week against Justin Herbert?
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
I think that's what went so well
Mhm.
for the Houston Texans, picking off Justin Herbert 4 times. And I've said this before. We could talk about the Chargers a different time, but I've mentioned it so many times how when Justin Herbert tries to make the big plays, that's when he turns the football over. He doesn't turn it over when he's a conservative player. So I think the key for Patrick Mahomes here is obviously he's a much different player, a much different quarterback who plays a much different way than Justin Herbert does. But I think the key thing here is just try not to do much. You look at his divisional round resume, it's superb. Hasn't turned the football over, 16 touchdowns, 70% completion rate. I think it's a 117 passer rating, 116, somewhere around that range. Like, that's the guy you're dealing with here when you're playing Patrick Mahomes. He's looking for a seventh straight AFC championship game. And to me, I think what Houston does in the playoffs is remarkable and how they've turned it around from the way they played against Baltimore in week 17
Yeah.
to what we've seen now. But that team just is not good enough. Mahomes is not going down in the divisional round. And I got to say one thing also. We're talking about the turnovers from Houston. That was the key problem for Mahomes early in the season. He has not turned the ball over since, if I recall correctly, November the
Yeah.
19th.
Mhm.
It's been a long time, folks, and I think that's something that's going unnoticed. I think the Chiefs are peaking at the right time. This team is on its way to a third straight title.
And you mentioned those turnovers. I mean, Mahomes has been really, really, really good recently. He hasn't thrown an interception in 6 straight weeks. That's the exact week total, which is really, really impressive for him. And then the Texans, obviously coming off that 20-point victory, the Chiefs had some rest in their bye week, but Kansas City has allowed just 19 points per game, which is the fourth fewest of any team in the NFL. Travis Kelce coming off one of his best games of the season against Pittsburgh in Week 17. Xavier Worthy has had at least 75 scrimmage yards and a touchdown in his last 3 games, excluding the Chiefs game against the Denver Broncos, obviously in Week 18. And then CJ Stroud hasn't had a game with a completion percentage of over 70% since October 6th. That is about 3 months ago at this point.
I
Nine of
think
the
it was actually against Buffalo when Allen was like 9 of 30 on the other side.
Yeah,
If I'm doing that, if thinking about that correctly, yeah, that was a crazy game. A
mhm.
lot's changed since then. Allen
Yeah,
9
and
of
then nine of the Texans' 10 wins during the regular season came against under 500 teams. The one win obviously came against the Bills, as you just mentioned. Houston is also 4-5 in games where Stroud has thrown at least one interception. And Joe Mixon's dealing with an ankle injury. He is questionable. I believe that he's going to play. I don't know if he's going to play 100%. I don't know if they're going to be able to utilize him as much as they typically do. If he is playing on a bad ankle, we'll see, what happens there.
I mean,
Chiefs
that'll
also.
be huge. He's
Mhm.
been key all year. I think Joe
Yeah.
Mixon's been one of the most underrated additions from last offseason.
Oh, yeah,
Of course,
100%.
you can include Danielle Hunter even too on the Texans defense. But you look at Joe Mixon, this running game has completely been flipped around. It's no longer the Damian Pierce, Devin
Mhm.
Singletaries of the world. You finally have some stability there, and health is always an issue at running back,
Yeah.
and we've seen that from Mixon this year. But yeah, he's been great.
Yeah, I mean, Mixon has obviously been amazing. They made a splash during the offseason. I really liked what they did over the offseason. Obviously, Mixon, Hunter, Diggs, it has paid off so far. Chiefs beat Texans in Week 16, and that wasn't playoff Patrick Mahomes. We obviously know that the playoff version of Patrick Mahomes is a different version of Patrick Mahomes. And an interesting stat that I have, the Chiefs have gone 11-0 in one possession games this season. And while you could argue they've gotten a little lucky, the Isaiah Likely foot catch and all that stuff, maybe some
Don't
questionable
go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. That's a rough place for me, Matthew. All right,
Yes.
let's not go there.
But my point is the odds of a coin landing on the same side 11 times in a row is 0.0005%. You're not like you have to be
Okay, but like,
you have to be you don't just magically win 11 one possession games. You don't
o-
magically that doesn't magically happen. There
of
has
course.
to be obviously a lot of skill involved, and the Chiefs can win in close game situations. That's what matters. Kansas City is going to win this one.
I mean, the Chiefs have become the new Patriots, where every
Mhm,
single year teams are going to say people across the NFL are going to like. I've had many people tell me straight to my face, whether it's
mhm,
virtually or in person,
mhm.
that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to go out in this game. And
They're not.
I can't, that's unfathomable to me. Forget the
Mhm,
fact that they're a 9-point favorite, they're at home, all that. Guys, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, I think
mhm.
the number one thing us humans do, we tend to hate the things we don't have. And unless you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I'm a Ravens fan, you hate that you don't have this right now.
Yeah,
You do. The Chiefs are better than everyone else. Guys, we're talking about this. Luck going their way, Isaiah likely toes, pass interference, coin tosses, botch snaps, this, that, the other thing, and doink field goals for the division
mhm,
against the Chargers. We're saying all of this. They went 15-1 with their starters in this year.
yes. Mhm.
Like, if this is their bad version, then what is their good version?
Yeah,
And
uh-huh.
that is what scares me about Kansas
'Cause I'm
City.
like,
Because I feel like
I
we
think
only scratched
mhm.
the surface of what this 2024 team is capable of.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're trying to say is they haven't looked amazing out there. Record doesn't lie. Record doesn't
Right.
lie. They're 15-1, and
And they're
until
getting
someone beat
and they're
mhm.
peaking now. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
again, what
yeah.
you won by 8 points to the Texans. They were clearly the superior team
Mhm,
in that matchup. I mean, and they proved that. But outside of that, or after that Chargers game and those Raiders games where we had kind of those like lucky bounces and people were like, "Oh, the Chiefs aren't legit." Blow out the Browns, pretty much blow out the Texans, blow out the Steelers before you head into 2 weeks off with the bye
mhm,
week. So I just think that this is the Kansas City Chiefs team that is peaking at the right time. They're getting hot. The way that the Texans win this game, CJ Stroud has got to do it all. And when I mean do
yeah,
it all, like he's got to have one of those games where you sit back, one of those historic performances, like a Joe Burrow had against Patrick Mahomes or a Tom Brady. The only times that Pat Mahomes has been eliminated. And then you're going to have to force some turnovers and hope they could go your way. I mean, at the end of the day, if the Chiefs take care of the football and frankly just run the football a lot too and keep
mhm,
Stroud off the field, I find it hard to believe that the Texans find a way to win. I think it's the Chiefs by one score.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that being a reasonable outcome. Now, moving over to the game that obviously I care about the most, we have Commanders at Lions tonight. Lions 8.5 point favorites. Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. No major injuries heading into this one. And I don't wanna be like a anti-Commanders fan right now and pick against them both times, that they've played in the playoffs so far, but this game's obviously going to be extremely, extremely difficult for Washington. Detroit averaged the 2nd most passing yards per game and the 6th most rushing yards per game. They also averaged the most points per game with just over 33. That is really, really unbelievable, honestly, 33 points per game. And then they allowed just 98 rushing yards per game, which isn't ideal, obviously. I felt like in the second half of the Commanders' last game, they couldn't run for a single yard. It felt like anytime they ran, it was a waste of possession, it was a waste of a down, and I mean, it just wasn't working. The Buccaneers,
Until the final play when Jaden
yeah,
Daniels evades the pressure and gets that first
yeah.
down. He's marvelous. He truly is.
But I mean, like in terms of like running backs, Brian
Right.
Robinson, obviously, it wasn't just working too well.
Nothing was
Yeah.
materializing in the second half,
Yeah,
100%.
The Buccaneers are a good run defense. Detroit's just as good, so I don't really know what to expect in terms of that. Hopefully, Robinson can bounce back a little bit in this one. The
Well, I mean, I
Commanders
think
have a
you got to
mhm,
see a lot of Daniels direct runs early.
yeah,
I mean,
mhm,
it's the same thing we saw from Lamar Jackson before he got Derrick Henry. Like, obviously
mhm,
now it changes the whole game, but Lamar and Daniels are very similar in terms of
mhm,
their play style and kind of how they play coming into the league. And that's why, I mean, as a Baltimore Ravens fan, I love watching Daniels.
mhm,
If you see a lot of direct runs from Daniels, this is how Lamar did it with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. It then opens up avenues for the running backs. So, I mean, you got to do a lot of read option, have Daniels keep it. Hopefully he can get it going, and then that's how you materialize a rushing game, I believe, kind of down the stretch. And if they do that, I mean, we could talk about it, but 8.5 point spread might be a little bit too high.
Yeah, and then I mean Washington has allowed the third most rushing yards per game this season of any team. Their run defense looked actually solid against Bucky Irving last week. In general, not great, and that's going to be terrible. It's going to be a terrible matchup against Montgomery and Gibbs. Gibbs has 8 touchdowns in his last 4 games. I'm not looking forward to seeing how the Commanders' run defense does in this one. It'll also be interesting to see how Dan Quinn plays because I think he almost played like Dan Campbell last week. Washington went for it on 4 fourth downs,
Well, I mean
or
that. I mean,
5,
I mean,
5 fourth
you
downs,
you
yeah.
know that you know this as good as anyone. I mean, you're
Mm,
mentioning the fourth down stats. The Commanders are playing with house money right now. I mean,
yeah,
this was not supposed to be what's currently a 13 win total.
I
The
think
13
I
total win
think they
season.
left I think they left a lot of points on the board going, on 4th downs last week, but I also think they probably don't win if they don't go on all those 4th downs. So if you're a
Again,
team
it is the Dan
yeah,
Campbell saga where
mhm,
it's like you have to
yeah,
weigh the risk, and trust me, it ruined him in the NFC Championship game, and he'll be the first to tell you,
mhm,
and Lions fans will be the first to tell you. But I think you need a coach to be that aggressive, and I don't think the Commanders are here without the will and the confidence that Dan Quinn instills among his men and his roster to go for it on fourth down. You got to instill that trust in your offense. He trusts his quarterback, and I think that mutual respect there is what could make this a really dangerous playoff run. Now, Matt, if you wouldn't mind me kind of touching in here on this game, because
yeah.
I've been giving it a lot of thought. You're essentially, I feel like, counting the Commanders out. And I know obviously
No,
you're
I'm
not.
not counting the Commanders out. I'm just saying it's gonna be really difficult. I don't trust our defense. That's the main thing. I don't trust our defense. I don't trust Lattimore, assuming he obviously goes up against Amon-Ra. I don't trust the defense. Benjamin St. Juice could get destroyed by Jameson Williams on a play. That's
That's
a
a
long
really bad
touchdown. Yeah.
situational matchup. Yes.
Like, I just don't trust the defense, but to be honest, if you have Jaden Daniels, anything is possible. This team has been playing yeah, I mean, anything is possible
I
with
mean,
Jaden Daniels.
that
But
that that's that. I mean, that's the moneymaker statement. Jaden
yeah.
Daniels is Jaden Daniels, and I think
Mhm,
that we know people who are quick to put Daniels down, and it's the same thing we saw with Lamar Jackson. People absolutely love to criticize these mobile quarterbacks. I think Jaden Daniels is having the best rookie season we've seen from a quarterback since Andrew Luck, when he was like the biggest phenom rookie we've seen. People want to bring up CJ Stroud last year or Justin Herbert in
no,
2020.
no.
These guys weren't even reaching near the level
Mhm,
that Jaden Daniels of what he's doing right now. I think this game is going to come down to the final possession. And the reason why I
mhm.
say that is you are 100% right. The speed of the Lions, top to bottom on their offense, is scary.
Yeah.
The way, I mean, schematically, just the way that they'll game that Dan Campbell and Dan Johnson, yeah, the way that the game plan Ben Johnson, the way that they will game plan for this matchup. I mean, schematically, that's just horrible for the Washington
Yeah.
Commanders. Dan Quinn is a defensive mind, and I do think that at the end of the day, Jaden Daniels is a better quarterback than Jared Goff. And I know it sounds
Mhm, mhm.
very
Yeah.
cliche to just go to who has the better quarterback on the field, but I believe this is a game where the Lions got the firepower. Adding David Montgomery back is even adding another hard piece to the puzzle. That teams haven't been able to figure out the Lions without Montgomery. Now you add in back Montgomery, and then it could be dangerous once again. But the longer this game is close, if you start to get some pressure, Daniel starts to make some plays. He can do that. I can't see this game separating to the 2 or 3, like high two, like a 14 or a 17 point deficit in the second quarter or third quarter. I can't see that happening like some fans are anticipating.
Mhm.
And if that doesn't happen, you can't count the Commanders out.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're going to win this game. I'm not going to put that out there. All I am saying is if this is the final drive and Jada Daniels has the football, there are very little people I would rather want the football in my hands than Daniels. He's got the ice in his veins. He
Mhm.
knows what to do down the stretch. And I think that is just, I mean, you have a quarterback who knows how to play the game in the fourth quarter and knows how to win the football game. We
Yeah.
saw that last week, and I think that's huge. And the fact that the Commanders have that on this offense, it gives them a chance against a team that the Lions are a much more superior team.
Yeah.
I'd argue, depending on how this game goes, the Commanders could very well have the best player on the field. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, Detroit's defense is really banged up, and the Washington's an underdog, but they've been playing as an underdog basically the entire season.
And they're playing
And
with less money. If
yeah,
you lose, this isn't Detroit where you're going
mhm,
back to the drawing board again after a division winning season.
yeah,
And now you have a fan base that turned into the Cinderella Kitties and are now looking at like, all right, what's the future of our franchise looking like from here? Is Jared Goff the answer? Depending on how tonight goes. If the Commanders lose this game, it's all but
so what?
positive. And
So
right.
what? Like,
You
we
got
weren't supposed to make it this far, we
13
already
total
did.
wins. Like, this is,
Yeah,
I mean, as someone who's from Baltimore, you'd probably think, oh, like the local rivalry or whatever. I'm loving watching what the Commanders are doing
yeah,
right now. I
mhm,
think they're outside of Baltimore my favorite team to watch in the entire NFL. I'm just being honest. And I
yeah,
know
I mean,
we got to move on and get to future games, but this one I'm really
yeah,
marking on my calendar
I mean,
because Jaden Daniels is just as electric as any player, I think, in the game.
I just wanna add real quick, if we lose this game, it doesn't matter. We weren't supposed to make it to this point, and I think every single Commanders fan in the world is satisfied with how we played this season. We know there's a bright future. But moving over to the next game, we have Rams at Eagles. Eagles 6.5-point favorites. This
Indeed.
one's Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Chase, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, to me, the thoughts are the Eagles going to have to pass the football because I think that's the question that everyone else is saying right now. Saquon Barkley is good enough on his own with the offensive line he has, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, and I'm not going to name. I mean, I feel like every starter on that offensive line is great, so
Yeah,
I'm just going to stop mentioning it there and not trying to leave someone out. They have a great O line group. They have Saquon Barkley, probably the most prolific runner in the NFL. I believe it's him and Derrick Henry, especially come postseason time. They both know how to step up. So last time we saw these two teams face off, 37-20, Eagles crushed them. And Saquon Barkley went for over 300 scrimmage yards. And that's kind of like the key storyline. That's not happening again. But if Barkley is once again the driving source of offense for Philadelphia, and if it's working, Philly's going to the NFC Championship game.
mhm,
However, I do think there is an element of, yes, what the Rams defense does best is rush the passer, and that's why it was a great combination for them to face Sam Darnold, who I think loves taking sacks. He's probably still taking a sack right now from that game. Jared Verse is still probably in his dreams. He's seeing ghosts probably still. But that's a different conversation for a different day. That was a horrible, horrible game. But all I'm going to say is what the Rams do best is rush the passer. I don't believe they can stop the run. So the Eagles are going to come out and they're going to run the football. However, if this becomes a really, really tight game, the Eagles are not going to be able to go 2 possessions without a completion again. They're not going to be able to. They're not going to be able to. And I think the fact that they had such a horrific offensive game against Green Bay and the fact that they won by 12 points, I think that just gives confidence actually to Eagles fans that things can go so wrong and yet appear so right. I think the thing with Philadelphia, you got to be able to stick with the rushing game. The rushing game's got to work. And then I honestly think Hurts has got to make the plays at some point. Like Jalen Hurts had 130 yards last week. Like we're all here. I've said it for a while. I think Jalen Hurts is a system quarterback. Matt, you
yeah,
were live to hear me say it. You were right there on the
and
other
I
side.
I completely agree with you there.
And so it's
Mhm,
just he's got to eventually make the plays. And I think the Rams are going to say they're going to go into this game and put all of their eggs in the basket of stopping the run. And they're going to look at Jalen Hurts and they're going to say, beat us.
mhm,
And I don't know if he can. But again, on the flip side, can they even contain the run to begin with? That's what makes this matchup so confusing because the Rams got the better quarterback, and I believe they have the better head coach. And those are two things that usually win you a playoff game. But the rest of the team around the quarterback and the head
mhm.
coach, I believe, is the advantage for Philadelphia. These are two well coached teams. I mean, schematically, both of these teams are going to be ready. It's going to be a great game to watch. The Eagles are just a better football team. And I think that Jalen Hurts will not have as much pressure on him as the Rams will anticipate that he will. Whether that's physically or mentally, because I think that's part of it as well. So I think the Eagles are going to go another game where Hurts doesn't really have to do much and they walk their way to the NFC Championship game. But I will say he's got to make the plays at some point, whether it's today or in a future meeting.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, the Eagles are a better team. Okay, they're a much better team. They beat the Rams by 17 earlier this season, as you mentioned. They've gone 13-1 in their past 14 games. They have the second best rushing game in the NFL, obviously behind the Ravens, but
Right.
Saquon Barkley has had at least 110 scrimmage yards in 14 of his 17
Awesome.
games this season. Yeah, I mean, teams and you
No one anticipated this
yeah,
impact, by the way. Like, when we're talking about the Ravens and the Eagles, like, they've always had great rushing games with mobile quarterbacks. No one, for some reason, was talking about the fact that these teams added two of the best runners in the
yeah.
NFL, and the NFL is paying the price for it right now that they let this happen.
I mean, teams can strategize against Henry or not Henry, Barkley, and that's what they've been doing all season, but it hasn't worked. It clearly hasn't worked. The Eagles
Right.
also allow the fewest passing yards per game of any team. Jalen Hurts in his last 7 games, he has 12 total touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Cooper Kupp hasn't had 30 receiving yards in 3 straight games, and the Eagles haven't allowed 20 points or have allowed 20
I think
points just
Cooper Kupp is a decoy at this point. I mean, to
yeah,
me, Cooper Kupp is
yeah.
just like the guy who can go off, so you gotta
Mhm.
contain him. But all of a sudden you contain
Um
Nakua, and he is capable of going off still.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and
No.
Philly has allowed 20, points just one time in their past 7 games. So I do actually think I know I've been talking great about Philadelphia. I do think it'll be close. Give me a 22-19, Philadelphia victory, but, it should be a very, very interesting game. Now we have Connor Long in the chat. By the way, if you are watching this, make sure you do, uh
Why does that comment, for some reason, why does that comment not shock me? If you were in our private chat between me, Matthew, our great friend Josh Williver, and Connor Long, I think you'd have a pretty good understanding that he's going to pick against both the Commies and the Ravens. Can we just jump into that one real quick? I mean, it's the
yeah.
game of the year, the game of the decade, maybe the game of the century, Matthew.
Mhm.
Is it the game of the millennium? Like, this is like, we're talking about here Josh Allen versus Lamar Jackson. Chase, remember when you called me crazy during week 2 for saying Jalen is better than Daniels? LOL. I am still calling you crazy because we just had a conversation about how Jalen Hurts is incapable of throwing the football. Um, and then we're talking about Jaden Daniels perhaps being the best player on a football field against the number 1 seed. So I'm not actually quite sure what you're talking about, Connor, but I appreciate you commenting there. Chase, Lamar's not going to win in Buffalo. Well, let me give you a few reasons why you're wrong, Connor Long. Lamar Jackson doesn't have to win in Buffalo. Derrick Henry will. And whether this is what Bills fans put on their Josh Allen MVP, Bills advocates, whatever, what if they put this on their Josh Allen MVP resume, that's fine. Truly, I don't. Lamar's won 2 MVPs. It could truly mean less to me. Couldn't mean less to me. But I just think that Lamar Jackson doesn't need to go out there and be the star in this game. Lamar Jackson's
Yeah.
going to be a decoy again. Like, Lamar Jackson may have a few carries here and there. It's the Derrick Henry game. And until the Bills can prove that they can stop the run, they're going to have a very, very rough time. Because Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson is a scary thought. And I even commented on Ravens Rundown on one of their polls. Talk about Keaton Mitchell. And I've gotten some backlash for it. I think it has like 14 replies, 8 of them calling me an idiot practically. But like, this is a team with the rushing talent and the rushing capability to humiliate the Buffalo Bills. And I think that's what they're easily going to be able to do in this game. I had more worries going into, as a Ravens fan, going into Baltimore's game against Pittsburgh than I did about this game going into Buffalo schematically. Now, obviously, um, the Bills are a better team than the Steelers, but they're a nightmarish matchup, them being Baltimore, for the Buffalo Bills. The Bills can't stop the run, and no team runs better than Baltimore. I am bullish on Baltimore. I got the
Yeah.
Ravens. I think they win this game. I think they go into Buffalo and get their own crack at Pat Mahomes and Kansas City because guess what? MVP. Maybe Josh Allen will make more plays than Lamar Jackson tonight, but it won't matter because the Ravens got the better team and they have Derrick Henry. And that's why when you throw those two together, it's a dangerous sight. I got the Ravens by 2 scores.
Yeah, I mean, I have the Ravens as well. And as you mentioned, this is the Derrick Henry show. Baltimore is on a 5-game winning streak, including a dominant win last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers in the divisional round. And Derrick Henry, in his last 4 games, has averaged 175 scrimmage yards and 5 total touchdowns. Bateman has
His
five
team is
touchdowns in
peaking.
his
His team's peaking at the right time. I'm
yeah.
telling you. This
Bateman has
is
had 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games. Andrews has had 1 touchdown in 6 of his last 7 games. I mean, Baltimore, I just think, is the better team. They have the seventh most passing yards of any team and the most rushing yards, obviously. Why is Lamar Jackson the MVP this season? I know you wrote a whole article about this. I know you're really, confident about this. Why is Lamar Jackson the MVP this year?
Because I think he shows more value to his team than anyone else. And you're going to talk about supporting cast. Josh Allen's got an offensive line. He's dealt with less drops. Again, you guys can read my whole article. Go to chasecoburn.substack.com. Wrote a great piece on there, Matt. I appreciate you saying that as well. I just think that Derrick Henry adds a whole other element, but there is also a part of Derrick Henry going from 1,100 rushing yards to 1,900 that there is something to that as well. Connor, I'm not quite sure what you're saying is not true. Both of the statements I just made about more drops, that's actually a stat that I put in the article. And then the offensive line argument, you're a big PFF person. You can check out all your advanced analytics on there. The reason why he's going to win MVP. Again, he's Lamar Jackson, MV3, everybody. But you're right. Adding Derrick Henry, of course, helps, but I think Lamar helps Henry as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
truly a great
They
duo.
they they complement each other,
I don't
obviously.
care if it hurts. Of course, they build off each other. They complement each
Yeah.
other. And frankly, I don't care whether Lamar Jackson wins the MVP award because having both of them together is much better than an MVP trophy on the mantle. I mean, truly, it's fun to watch. To me, the main thing that obviously concerns me, Lamar hasn't won consecutive playoff games because he's fallen apart in that second game. But to me, I think the reason why Lamar fell apart was because he tried to do it all himself. And I think now, schematically, when you're going to be going to Derrick Henry so much, it's actually going to be hard for Lamar Jackson to just blow the game, take the game into his own hands, and make enough horrible turnover-worthy plays to lose this game. In my opinion, I just think it's a much different team than we've ever seen under Lamar Jackson, and I think it actually makes it harder for Lamar Jackson to blow this game, actually, and possibly lose in the playoffs again. So, look, man, I don't mean to cut you off and trying to make this my show and all that. You can see I'm wearing a Ravens hat. I'm bullish on Baltimore. I think they win this game, and I just think that this is a team where they have the talent across the board. They have the coaching. They're peaking at the right time. This could be the year. And you guys are arguing about the MVP. That's fine. Argue about the MVP all you want. I would actually love for you to read my article and hear some of those thoughts. And frankly, I don't need to get into the social media MVP arguments. How about my answer to you will just be see you tomorrow after
Yeah.
34-21 Baltimore. I got the Ravens. Matt, do you agree with me or is Buffalo getting their crack at KC?
Yeah, I do have the Ravens in this one as well. I do think it's gonna be a close game in general. I do think the Ravens are the better team. And, Connor says, "No Zay Flowers too, LOL." I don't think that really matters that much, to be honest.
No,
I meant
it,
I
it, it,
mentioned
it
I
doesn't
mentioned how
because
good, Bateman and Andrews have been recently. It didn't
like
matter last week when they won by 14. I don't think that Allen's working with the best weapons. I don't think that Baltimore's
I mean,
wide
haven't we won every one of our games by multiple scores
yeah,
since the beginning of
Bal
December? I
Baltimore's
mean,
wide receiver core is not necessarily worse than Buffalo's even without Flowers.
no,
So
it's not. And frankly, well, I mean, Connor's putting on here, it doesn't matter, shake my head. Frankly, it doesn't. Schematically to this game, Zay Flowers' absence is not as beneficial toward
no.
Buffalo as it would be in most matchups because the Ravens, what they're going to do anyway is run the football. And if you actually watch the film, like I've been doing the entire week, the Bills shut down screen passes anyway. So what Flowers does best, those short routes to get yards after the catch, would probably be actually minimized in this game too. So I think there has to be an element to that as well.
Yeah, well, obviously, we can agree that this is going to be the game of the week and potentially the game of the year, as you mentioned. With that being said, we are going to have to wrap things up. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
To Connor, who said Flowers at 100 yards last week. Zay Flowers didn't play last week,
Yes, he did not.
so thank you so much for that. And he also said it's always the Ravens' year until they travel to Buffalo or KC. They've never traveled to KC, so argue all you want, argue with a brick wall. but get your facts straight while my football team goes on a demolition course to New Orleans. Matt, I appreciate you having me on. It's going to get heated. I'm staying out of any arguments. I'm not dealing with this week. I'm going to sit back, win, loss, or draw, Matthew. It's football.
Mhm.
You got to love it. I wish you the best of luck to your Commanders tonight. And I think we're in for a doozy of a divisional round, to say the least.
Yeah, now I do know that you have to get going real quick. Where can the people watching find your work?
Chase's Sports News on YouTube. Check it out. Also mention my newsletter, chasecoburn.substack.com. We're going to have a really a great in-depth preview over on there tomorrow for Ravens Bills. So please be sure to check that out. Putting together some great stuff there. Again, Chase's Sports News YouTube channel, another great place. Going to give my own divisional predictions. Maybe a little bit repetitive of this, but even adding in some of my own predictions as well, kind of for this divisional round. So you can find that. And then follow me on Twitter at Cool Sports Kid. Tweet a lot on there. I'll be tweeting live during the game, talking about Baltimore's 2-possession win over Buffalo. So you guys can check me out there. Connor, I'd say enjoy your loss tomorrow, but your loss has already come 12 times and it never comes in January. So with you being a Jets fan. So I appreciate you guys. Matt, thank you so much. It's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. For everyone who made it up to this point, can't thank you enough for watching. Again, I'm Matthew Heisman. That was Chase Coburn. This is your divisional round Highlight Haven NFL Tailgate show. I really appreciate everyone who was in the chat. Connor Long, Timothy Park, really appreciate you guys tuning in. And as always, we will see you next time.